All right, good morning, everyone. A couple things. What we're going to do today, just so you know, is I emailed you today your chapters 6 and 7 homework. And technically, there are 6 problems on it, even though it looks like there's 4 of them. We're going to do 2 of them together today. All right. And I have no idea. I would imagine if we take our time, take till around 10 o'clock or so. All right. And the rest of the period will be lab. And the reason the rest of the period will be lab is that yesterday your chapters 4 and 5 homework were due, homework and written tests. Now I realize there was a lot of homework to do. All right. There were like 10 problems that you were to do, but several people did not turn it in. All right, so I'm going to give you some lab time today, and I'm going to give you some lab time tomorrow to work on it and get that done. For those of you who did get it done, there'll be other things for you to work on. All right, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. All right. So today, as it says, we're going to continue working on the Murach chapter 6 and 7 as a class. I did attach the homework to today's email, and I'm going to do the last 2 problems that are on the homework, but I am not going to save them to a GitHub repository. Why? Because you are responsible for creating and turning in all of the homework, including those. All right, and again, the rest of the period will be lab. Tomorrow will be the pretest. For the pretest, what I want people to do is to take the last pretest we did, which had 2 problems on it, a temperature conversion, Fahrenheit to Celsius or Celsius to Fahrenheit on it, and a baseball batting average problem. I want you to redo the temperature conversion problem so it uses the generic validation methods that we went over in chapter 6. And for chapter 7, or for the batting average, I want you to add exception handling like we did in chapter 7. Again, I will go over both of those tomorrow with you starting at 8:05 a.m. The rest of the period, again, will be lab. Wednesday will be the chapters 6 and 7 hands-on test, C# hot number 3. As always, what I'll do is by no later than 7 a.m., I will email the test to you. I will then go over the test instructions between about 8:05 a.m. and 8:20 a.m. The rest of the period will be for you to work on the test. So you get, again, about 3.5 hours. All right. And it'll be due by midnight, Wednesday night. On Thursday, we will begin chapter 8. That's the only chapter we're going to be covering next. Is just one chapter, not several, or not 2, etc. All right, so we'll start that on Thursday. Friday will be lab for the entire period. Why? It's because your chapter 6 and 7 homework will be due next Sunday, the 11th, by midnight or midnight Monday morning, however you want to look at that. Next week, so the week of the 12th, we will continue on with going over arrays. Now, I do want to mention something to you. It's a little bit ahead, but you're going to see it from me. I may have mentioned it before. I may not have. I don't remember. 2 weeks from today, the 19th, there will be no class. And the reason for that is it's President's Day. And Rankin always gives off for Veterans Day in November and President's Day, which falls in February. That'll be the last off days, so to speak, that we have until right near the end of March, the last Friday in March, the 29th. All right. So remember, your chapters 4 and 5, C# homework and written tests were due yesterday. So again, if you have not turned those in, get them in as soon as possible. You're already going to get somewhat of a points penalty, maybe 10%. I don't know. All right. Next, your completed Murach chapters 6 and 7 hands-on test, C# hot number 3, will be both given, explained, and due by midnight this Wednesday, the 7th. Finally, again, as I mentioned earlier, your completed Murach chapter 6 and 7 homework and written tests will be due by next Sunday, a week from yesterday. Now, what you probably noticed is that several of you last week got one of these early alert messages. All right. And I've mentioned this before, I'm going to say it again, and that is the fact that Rankin is really hitting on us starting this semester, that if we have a student who currently has a grade for the class that is under a C, that we send out an early alert message right away. I have people in the class who meet that criteria. So I sent out early alert messages. Well, I got an email on Friday from Emily I think it's Malaby, and she is our Rankin Student Success Counselor / Coordinator. And she said that she had contacted several people in the class, and she said that one of the things that they would really like would be if you'd kind of do some review before you go on at the beginning of class or the beginning of a week. So let's take a couple of minutes and do that and just talk about, for lack of better words, where you should be, what you should understand right now. All right, so I'm going to bring this up, and this is, of course, is our textbook. Now, other than a couple people who, for various reasons, all right, are not there yet, I believe everybody has completed the work for chapters 1, 2, and 3. All right. So you by now, all of you should understand how to, as it says there, design a Windows Forms app, code and test a Windows Forms app. And even though it doesn't say it on there, you should also be familiar and comfortable with how to design a how to design a console app and how to code and test a console app. That's pretty much what we did in chapters 1, 2, and 3. All right. Then we went over 4 and 5. What I've been trying to do ever since almost the beginning of the semester, all right, was to start working with methods and stuff like that so that they weren't brand new to you. But in 4 and 5, we talked about working with numbers. All right, anything like a convert dot to decimal or a decimal dot try parse, etc. And not just decimals, but we worked with decimals, we worked with integers, we talked about doubles, and we talked about some of the other numeric types, which we really don't typically have reason to use. We also have been working with strings. And you know that unlike JavaScript, where you can put a string in either double quotes or single quotes, in C#, you must go in and you must put your string in double quotes. So we looked at string data and some of the string methods, etc. All right, then we went over the control structures. We talked about the 3 basic looping structures. Those are a while loop, a do-while loop, and a for loop. In addition, we talked in a lot of length about if statements using just a plain if, and if with an else, and if with one or more else ifs. So we looked at those in quite a bit of detail. Finally, we talked about switch statements and a lot of their different variants. Now, again, that was the test that you had last week. I do want to make sure people get this, and I want to show you something very small here. And it might seem insignificant to some of you. You might be like, well, this is dumb. We've already gone over it. I'm sorry, because some people are still struggling with this. All right, that if you've got something like this, int x equals 27, int y equals 15. If I want the sum of those, so if I want to say int sum All right, let's just say that I'm a little later on in my program, okay, down here someplace. You have to say sum equals x plus y. All right? Because why am I telling you this? Some people, for whatever reason, are still trying to do something like this. That will never work. All right? And the reason that it won't work is these are hard-coded values right here. You cannot do that. That might be the way you think about it, but here we're saying take this variable that we have basically declared right there and initialize it to the value of this plus the value of this. And like I said, if you're like, well, duh, that's good, then that's kind of where you should be. But I want to make sure that everybody in the class understands that. All right. Because as I said, Ms. Malaby said that people wanted some kind of a review, and that's what I'm trying to do right now. All right. Now, last week, we went over chapter 6 and chapter 7. In chapter 6, we talked about two basic things. The first were methods. We talked a lot about different things with methods, including how to code a method, what a method's signature is, and that's, again, the name of the method and what goes in the parentheses. All right. We talked about different event handlers, such as, I mean, the one you've been working with all semester have been button clicks. All right. If you double click on a text box, you bring up that text box. What is it? Text changed event. So most, really every single control that you put onto a form and the form itself all have event handlers that you can put code in there. And I showed you some examples of that. Now, in the last test, and I've got half of them done, the rest of them I will do this afternoon. I'll promise you. By tonight, you will know what your test grade is. All right. But on the last test, the chapters 4 and 5 test, you were not asked to write methods. You were not asked to handle exceptions. You were not asked to validate data. You will be asked to do those things on your chapter 6 and 7 test on Wednesday. So if I say put no code under click events other than a method call, what that means is under your click event for your exit button, don't put any code there except a call to a method that will ask the user whether or not they want to end the program. Same kind of thing. If you've got a clear button, what I want you to do is I want you to put in a call to a method that will clear what's on the form. All right. And I've been trying to do that most of the semester. All right. So that was what we went over in chapter 6. Then we went into chapter 7. And in chapter 7, we discussed two different ways that you can basically work with validating data. One is to handle exceptions. And with it, when you write exception handlers, you're writing try catch statements. All right. And in the try, you put curly braces, and in there you put one or more statements that can possibly fail. If something fails in there, all right, you go down and the system looks for a catch statement that will handle that kind of error, so you've got control over what happens next. We also went over, and you saw, some generic data validation methods, things like is present, is in32, is decimal, is operator, where we wrote our own, and is within range. I can guarantee you that when you take your test on Wednesday, you will be asked asked rather to code methods. You will have at least one problem that will have rating exceptions. You will have at least one problem where you use those generic data handlers, all right, or data validators, whatever you want to call them. Now, we've been trying to write things with methods for quite a while now. I think you know that, all right? But if I go down to here and we look at this, how to handle exceptions and validate data, okay? And we jump in here, we jump all the way, I don't know exactly where it'll be, but it's in here someplace. All right. There was a good page here in your book. It's page 211 that shows how to set up a try catch statement where you've got multiple catches. All right. They explain the syntax on that page. And again, there are several examples. So if you're still confused, that's a good place to take a look. All right. There's more of it again on 213, but the one I wanted to mention was, there's a whole program here where they redo the future value application using exception handling, and that's on page 215 here. All right. The other thing that we talked about again were these generic data validation methods. All right. So I'm gonna actually move ahead a little bit here. And there was on 219, there's the is present, there's the is decimal. The only difference between an is decimal and like an is in 32 is here you would say is in 32, and here instead of trying to do a decimal dot parse, you do an int dot parse. Other than that, they're the same thing. And here's the is within range. In addition, if I go up a few pages here, I'm going to keep going up to, I think it's about 225 or so, 224. This is another page. What are we doing here? All right. Well, we are using in here that is valid data. There is nothing magical about that name. We could have called it anything. But since you're validating data, it seems like one that makes sense. All right. So in here, what are we doing? All right. Well, in that is valid data, this is where we're coming in and we are calling, if necessary, the is present. All right. Or the is decimal or is in 32 and the is within range. You are going to have to write code similar to this, both for the homework for chapter 6 and 7 and for the hands-on test for chapters 6 and 7. All right, so this is another page or a couple pages that you should be familiar with. All right, they're right there. And again, those generic handlers are shown here on 225. So 224 and 225 are pages that you'll want to make sure you know and understand, along with 211. All right. Now, I'm not sure when people said they were looking for some review, if that's what you were looking for or not. You might say, well, yeah, what I wanted you to do was I wanted you to go over the test with us. All right. And typically we don't do that. All right. If you've got specific questions and you want to email me, that would be fine. All right. So with all of that said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to close that and I'm going to open up this, which is your homework. All right. You'll notice if you look on the bottom again, due by midnight this Sunday, the 11th of February. All right. So there are 4 problems on here, but 2 of them you're supposed to do 2 versions of. So the first one, and many of you have done this particular program, you did it with me last semester in the AWD1000 class, you've done this program in JavaScript. All right. But what we're asking you to do here is, given a person's height and given a person's weight, you want to figure out whether they are underweight, of optimal weight, overweight, or obese for their height. All right. So the way that you do that is you calculate the person's body mass index, BMI. This is the formula. It's the weight that you inputted divided by the height squared, or the height times the height. Then you take that whole thing and multiply it by 703. Okay. And depending on the number you get back, if that number is less than 18.5, you're considered underweight for your height. If that number is greater than or equal to 18.5 rather, but less than 25, you're of optimal weight. If your calculated BMI is greater than or equal to 25 but less than 30, you're considered overweight. And if your BMI is 30 or above, you're considered obese. It has changed over the years. There's now different classifications of obese. I don't care. This is what we're using. So you were supposed to create 2 different examples of this. All right. They will look the same. It's a fairly simple interface. There are two labels, one that says weight, pounds, one that says height for inches. There's 2 text boxes. I did ask you, I didn't add them on here, but I did ask you to add clear buttons and exit button for each of the apps that you're going to be working on. So there'll be a calculate, a clear, and an exit. So if you put in valid values like this, calculate, notice that's normal. I don't want you to say normal BMI. In that case, I'd want you to say optimal weight. If you put a weight in that's invalid, it should just come back with something like invalid weight. All right, you can do it there. You can put it in a message box. It doesn't matter. And that's for, I'm sorry, that's for an invalid height. And I guess that was, no, that is invalid weight. And here's an invalid height. All right. And you are supposed to do this twice. The first one, as it says, you are supposed to use those generic validation methods that I just went over with you. And I think this is probably wrong. I think they're probably in chapter 7 of the book. All right. Add methods for is present. So you want to run is present on the height and the weight. Is in 32 because our input, we're asking the input to be just in whole numbers. All right. And is within range. Notice as it says there, use constants. Now your constants should be all in uppercase. I guess I can say this till I'm blue in the face, and some of you won't do it anyway for whatever reason. So that's the first one. Then you're supposed to rewrite that using exception handling. As it says, you are to remove those validation methods and replace them with try-catch exception handlers. What does all that mean? Let's take a look. All right, this is what I've done. So you'll notice right here, basically I've set it up the way that it's set up here. I guess I'd put height first, but there's no, who cares? If you want to put weight first, put weight first. If you want to put height first, put height first. I don't care. And I moved my label up with the answer. Theirs is down below, mine's up above. And I've got a working calculate, a working clear, and a working exit button. So you'll notice if I have nothing in here, all right, these are those generic error handlers. It says value cannot be null, null exception, and we did a stack trace. All right. If I put in garbage, I get a different message. It says format exception. One of the identified items was in an invalid format. And again, here's a stack trace. Finally, if I put something out of range, you'll notice I get a system argument out of range exception. All right. And again, this is the message. This is the type. This is the stack trace. I'd like you to put all those in just so you see how they're done. On the other hand, if I come in here and I'll put in 70, 72, and 111, that would be pretty doggone skinny. So BMI 1505, status underweight. Clear, you'll notice works. 72 and about 177. There it's 24, so you're of optimal weight. All right, 72 and about, I don't know, 211. And you'll notice you're overweight. Finally, 72 and 333, you're now obese. So all of those work. This one was done again with the generic error handlers. So if there's nothing there, it's spitting out, I'm sorry, this was the exception handlers. All right. So it is spitting out an exception. Let's take a look at the same program. All right, but with the generic error handlers. So if I click calculate, you've seen stuff like this before. This is virtually out of the book. But what I have done is I have replaced the field names that they use with txt height.txt and txt weight.txt. So height is required, height must be a valid decimal, weight is required, weight must be a valid decimal. And you'll notice if I come in here now and type in this, instead of getting 4 messages, I get 3. There is something there, so it doesn't say anymore that it's a required field. All right, but if I do come in here and put in this, which is out of range, now I get a different message that says height must be between 12 and 96, weight is required, and weight must be. Okay, so if I come in here and do make this valid, now I'm down to 2 errors. That weight is required and it must be a valid decimal. So if I come in here again and do this, again, now I'm down to 1 error. Weight must be a valid decimal value. And if I put something that's out of range, it could be positive or negative. Doesn't matter. Now I get weight must be between 1 and 777. And just like you saw before, if I put in this, underweight, if I put in this, optimal weight, if I put in this, overweight, and if I put in this, obese. So that is the first one that you are supposed to do. And I'm hoping I made that clear enough. And if I didn't, that you will let me know. Please read the instructions on here. 2 versions, okay? BMI validation and a BMI exceptions. You should be putting everything, by now, you should be putting everything into your homework folder. All of your homework solutions should go in there. All right, just to show you what I mean, if that confuses you, if I were to open up my homework folder, because I've been doing them too, all right, then what you'll notice is if I open this up, there they all are. All right, so this is everything that we've done for homework so far. They're all in there. All right. All right. Then the second problem that's in here, you're again supposed to make 2 versions of this one. One that uses exception handling, one that uses those generic validation methods. This is an order application. All right, you are to enter 3 things. So you have 3 inputs, an item number, and the range for that, the valid range is 100 through 999. All right, so I made constants, min order number of 100, max order number of 999. Quantity, which must be between 1 and 12. I made min quantity of 1, max quantity of 12. And then estimated delivery days, 1 through 30. So I made min delivery days of 1 and max delivery days of 30. All right. And you'll notice that if you put, as they show right here, something that meets all 3 of the criteria. So we have an order number between 100 and 999. We have a quantity between 1 and 12. We have an estimated delivery days between 1 and 30. So when we click the validate button, all right, when you click the validate button, it should come up and say that the order is valid. Now, again, the item number must be 3 digits. The valid range is 100 through 999. And again, you are to use constants. The quantity has a range of 1 to 12. And again, you are to use constants. And the estimated delivery days must be between 1 and 30. And again, you are to use constants. There's no calculation that has to take place in here. All you're doing is you're validating what got put into the 3 text boxes. And based on that, either you're going to say that the order is valid or that the order is invalid. All right. Okay. So again, make 2 versions of this. The first uses validation. I don't care which one you do first. One uses exceptions. One uses order validate. The validation method shown again, I believe it's chapter 7 in our book. So you'll use the is present, the is in 32, and the is within range to check all 3 of those fields. All right. And then you'll do it once with the with these generic validation methods and once with exception handling. And again, make sure to add working clear and exit buttons for each app. Now, I didn't say this, but all right, I tried to write mine so that I used methods. And really, you should be doing the same thing. All right. Then these are the 2 we're going to do, start and go through in just a couple minutes. This one, create a program that inputs 3 student grades. You've done this before. This is not a hard program. The program logic itself is very minimal, but I want to make sure that you really understand how to use these how to use exception handling and these validation methods. All right, so as you can see, once you put in these 3, add them together and divide by 3. If the number comes out between 90 and 100, it's an A, 80 to 89 is a B, 70 to 79 is a C, 60 to 69 is a D, 0 to 59 is an F. So as it says here, implement methods, all right, and make sure that this stuff is valid. In fact, let's do this. I didn't run the other one, so let me run the last one for you. So this was, all right, an item number, and I guess I didn't get rid of it, good. So this was the item number, and again, if it's junk, in fact, let's try nothing. All right, you get that exception. If it's junk, you get that exception. If it's out of range, you get an out of range exception. Sometimes for some reason that comes up as out of range. Sometimes it comes up as a format exception. That's not that big a thing. All right, I'm not sure even why it's doing that, but it is. And the same thing with quantity. So in here they put 123, 1, and 5. That's what was shown in the example. Order is valid. But if I put something that's out of range, not only do I get the error, but okay, I guess I should have cleared that and I didn't. All right. All right. So I've got that one. And then I did it this way as well. So again, same kind of thing you saw before. The 6 errors, as soon as I put something in here, it goes down to 5. If I put something in here that's out of range, all right, same kind of thing, but it's 5. If I put an item number that is within range, now I go down to 4 errors. Okay, and it gets all the way down to that if I put in this, it's valid. All right. Okay, so the one we're going to start working on in just a couple minutes together will be this one. Let's look at this one. All right, so again, what are we supposed to be using in here? Exception handling. So if I leave it out, okay, you're going to see an exception. And the same thing will happen if I leave out any of the 3 grades. Here you'll see an exception. And what I want you to understand is if you look here, if there's nothing in here, the exception we're throwing is argument null. We left it out. If we put in something like this, it changes to a format exception, which means it was expecting one kind of format, that being a number, and we gave it another, meaning it was non-numeric. And if we put in something that's out of range, we get an argument out of range exception. All right, so let's just keep this simple and let's use the example that was shown in the book here, or in our page. 60, 70, 80. Click calculate. 70.00 equals C. All right, clear works, exit works. So we're going to do that one. All right, we're going to do that one together in just a bit. And then the last one that we'll look at after that is this payroll validator. Again, very similar to what we've done in class before, but we're working in this one with an is valid data method, and we will use the is present for both our employee hours worked and for our hourly rate. We will use the is decimal for both those two fields and the is within range for both of those two fields. I added a little something onto this that I actually think makes the program easier. And I'm going to show it to you. And if you want to use it, you can. If you either don't understand it or don't want to use it, you don't have to. Totally fine. But in here, so if I come in, leave it blank, just like we saw before. All right. Again, if I put in out of range, if I put in out of range, all right, you can see what's coming up here. If I put in 50, for example, I'm going to get the same kind of errors, but the errors for the hourly rate. So again, all right, finally, if I put this in, I calculate it. And it's supposed to calculate, and as we've done in the past, all right, it even works and it gives overtime. And I just made it, in fact, I put double time. I think mine's wrong. I think I used time and a half. I'll change it on mine. It's no biggie. All right, so these are the two problems we're going to go over. Now, I've been told, well, you know, when you go through this stuff, you do it really fast, and I'm not trying to. So I'll try to keep it nice and slow in here. All right, that is my promise to you. All right, so what I've already done here is I'm going to imagine, because like I already showed you, I've got a folder named C# homework. But for now, just for these two examples I'm going to run through with you right now, I created an empty folder that I called homework. All right, so I'm going to come in, I'm going to start up Visual Studio, and I'm going to write these. All right, so I'm going to create a new project. It will be a Windows Forms app, .NET framework. And I'm just going to call this one, I don't know, homework 03-03, because it's homework 3 and it's the third problem. All right, I'm going to put it into a folder, the one I have just shown you called homework. And I'm going to have the solution name also just be homework. All right, so there it is. Nothing new there. Okay, so we've got a fairly simple interface that we're supposed to be doing here. It looks like this. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4 labels, 1, 2, 3, 4 text boxes, and one of those text boxes is read only, and 1, 2, 3 buttons. All right, so let's build that. The first thing I like to do, you know this already, is to click on the form, then right mouse click on the form, choose rename, and I'm going to rename this FRM rates and call it whatever we wanted. That's fine as far as I'm concerned. Answer yes. It should kind of flash on the screen. Now that is done. So the other one I'm going to do is I'm going to change my text here that says homework 3, problem number 3. Again, you could put virtually anything you wanted to put there. Who cares? All right. And next, because I always do this, I'm going to change the background color of the form. All right, let's make it this turquoise here. That's fine. All right. As always, and by now, my hope is at least that you're all comfortable building an interface here. All right. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add my buttons. Both of these are going to look the same as far as they're going to have 3 buttons in here. And that's not spaced badly. I guess that looks fine. All right. And I'm going to have 4 labels. Okay, it doesn't look too bad. I'm going to make them all a little bit wider than that. Probably don't have to, but I am anyway. And I'm going to make 4 text boxes. Now this, of course, this is nothing new. This is what we've been doing all semester, basically. All right. And I will tell you, this is not a slam on anybody. All right. When you're doing this, if you don't like the way I do it, you want everything to be gray, go for it. That's fine. But some of you have been making your backgrounds really dark and you have not been changing the color of your text. So it's almost impossible to read. Sorry, that looks very unprofessional to do that. All right. Especially considering what you might want to do at the end of the semester. What you will want to do is to take some of these projects and put them into your portfolio. You want to make sure that a prospective employer, when she, he, or they look at them, is impressed, not turned off. All right. Okay. So I'm going to come in here. And as always, I'm going to change the size of my text. That's not too bad. Yeah, I'm okay with the whole interface, so I'm going to lock it into place. 2 more things. I'm going to come in here and center these. So I'm going to go down here to text align and just set it to the one in the middle and do the same thing here and go to the text align here and set that to center. All right. Now, because I have a way I like to do this stuff. All right. I'm just immediately going to come here. I'm already there. I'm going to change my start position to center screen, but I'm not going to change my accept and cancel button yet because I haven't renamed any of these. All right. So looking at the way this is supposed to look, I guess it's even the same color. All right. So this should say test number 1, test number 2, test number 3, and average or grade. Okay. So I'm going to name all these now. So I'm going to call this one LBL test 1. All right. And I will change the text in there to test number 1. All right, this will now become TXT test 1. This will become LBL test 2. With the text on it, test number 2. This will then be TXT test 2. This will become LBL test 3. It'll have the text on it, test 3. Test number 3, I guess. This will be TXT test 3. Finally, this is what I called it, was just LBL AVG grade. All right. And then I put in here AVG / grade like that. And I call this TXT AVG grade. All right. And finally, setting our buttons. First one will be BTN calculate. And the text on it will be ampersand calculate. All right, the second one will have the text of C ampersand LEAR, and it will be BTN clear. Finally, the last one will be BTN exit. And it'll have the text on it, E ampersand XIT. All right, now that my interface is finished, I always like to verify that by clicking on the form and then going up to here, clicking the down and double checking to make sure there's nothing I missed. I don't see anything, so if I have missed anything, I don't see it. All right, so that looks fine. Now I can come in here and I can set my start button. I'm sorry, my accept button and my cancel button. So my accept will be BTN calculate, meaning I can hit the enter key to make that work. And my cancel will be BTN clear, meaning I can hit the escape key to run that. All right, I've already set it up to center screen, so that's done. All right, and now I can set my tab order. Well, actually, this will be a read-only field. So let's set that to read-only right away. All right. So my tab order will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it's just the way I can tab through it. And I'm just saying I'd want to go here, and then I want to go here, then I want to go here. Can't really tab here because it's read only. So next would be the 3 buttons, then here, then finally these labels. All right. And I'm going to do now I'm going to do a view tab order to set it. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and one more view tab order. All right, now I can come over to here and run the program just to make sure it looks okay. It's totally non-functional right now. That's okay. But it looks the way I'm hoping that it would look. And you can see that goes there. And when I hit tab, all right, you can see where I'm going. All right. You cannot tab to a label, and that's why it's jumping back there. All right, couple things then. First, I'm going to highlight and remove all of these. Now I did this, and that is I came back in here and I grabbed the comments. I made my own comment based on what was on the homework page. So I've got that. All right, so now I've got that in there, so I at least have an idea of what I'm supposed to be doing. All right. And since I haven't done so in a while, it'd probably be a good idea to do a file save all. I don't think I've saved yet. So this will be my calculate, my clear, and my exit. And by now, when I do this, if I come in here and type in clear form, or whatever you decide to call yours, change that. All right. You should know that when you look at this, what do we want to clear? We want to clear this. We want to clear this. We want to clear this, and then put the focus here. That's fairly simplistic, like I said, with what we want to do. So txt test1.text equals nothing. Just gonna copy this twice. the txt test2 and test3. All right. Then finally, txt average grade dot text, or whatever it was, dot text, that's equal to nothing. And finally, txt test1 dot focus. So I now can go back and double check and make sure that works. Another file, save all, and let's run this. So I can put junk in here. It doesn't matter yet. We're not doing any validation. Click clear. Everything's working. That's good. All right. Then for our exit, again, I've given you this code already. All right, so I've got that, and I also brought in that show error message in case I need that. So now when I save and run it again, all right, and my exit button should be working as well. All right, so again, what's left to do in here? If we go back and take a quick look, all right, we need constants for the grades. So I'm going to have a min grade and I'm going to have a max grade. All right, that's the way that I did mine. All right, so with a min grade and a max grade. All right, and I'm going to want to use exception handling, as it says, to ensure that only valid grades are put in there. All right, so we're going to take a break in just a second, but I'm going to come up to the top here. And right underneath, you can't put it up here. You have to put it inside of the partial class. I'm going to declare and initialize my program constants, and I had 3 of them. All right, so const int, I called it min score, which I set equal to 0. Const int max score, which I said equal to 100, and a const string that I just called ER. You'll see why in a second. And it's going to hold exception raised. That's just what I'm going to title. Anytime I'm throwing an exception, I'm going to give it that title. All right. Do I have to do that? No, that's just the way that I did it. All right. So it is 8:57, a little early, but let's come back at 10 after. We'll write the code for this and we're going to jump right into the next one. I will see you then at 9:10. All right, it is 9:10, so let's continue on. I think everybody knows this, but just in case you don't know it, that basically every time you go in and you add something to a form on this, all right, The generic name for what you're adding is you're adding a control. So literally, there's 12 controls on this form. There is a form control, there are 4 text box controls, there are 4 label controls, and there are 3 button controls. So who cares? Why am I telling you that? Well, when you look at this, we literally want to run the same validation on test 1 and on test 2 and on test 3. So what we could do is we could run this 3 times, have 3 different routines, and then run it again, run with 3 more routines, and then run it with 3 more routines. But in my opinion, at least, that's pretty stupid because there'd be a lot of repetitive code. So what you can do in C#, I want to say this again, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, but what you can do in C#, you've started to learn how you can pass things to a method. One of the things that you can pass to a method is the control itself. And if you say, I don't understand, let's go through it and we'll see what I mean in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to come over to here, and this is under calculate. Now, this is where it'll start looking a little bit different. I'm going to come in here and say bool, keep going, equal, validate text box. Now, of course, it's going to give me an error because I don't have a routine called validate text box. But what I want to do is I want to pass it here, txt test1. So in other words, I'm going to call a routine here. And I'm going to write it right here just so you see it. So right here, I'm going to type in private void validate text box. And I'm going to pass in a control, which normally you just call control. All right. Now, again, you may think, who cares? This is where it'll become important. For now, we'll write code in here, but for now, I'm just going to return true, just so the errors all go away. All right, so this will be a bool. All right, and you'll notice I have no errors. Again, you might say, fine, who cares? Well, watch if you would, please. Because now I'm going to say, if keep going, okay. Oops. Meaning that this is going to return true. Then what I want to do is I want to say keep going equal, and guess what? I want to call validate text box again. But this time I want to pass the second text box in. All right. And if it failed, I know there was an error, so I'll just return. All right. Finally, and I'm going to move this down. I want you to be able to see all of it. All right. I'm going to copy. Whoops, not like that. I'm going to copy this and paste it. All right. Now, again, what I've done may not seem like much to you, but in here, I'm calling the same routine for all 3 text boxes, which means that rather than having to write it, basically the same routine for each text box, all right, now I don't have to do that anymore. I'll call validate text box, and this will be the first text box. And if that worked, meaning it was valid, meaning I put in a number between 0 and 100, then I'll call it again, but I'll pass in the second text box. If this returned false, I'm just going to return. After I call this with the second text box, if it returns true, I'm going to call it again and pass in the third text box. And again, if it doesn't work, I'm just going to return. So if I get down to right here, if I say if keep, oops, try that again. Sorry about that. If I say if keep going like that, if I get down to this point, that means that what I put in here was a valid number between 0 and 100. What I put in here was a valid number between 0 and 100. And what I put in here was a valid number between 0 and 100. So if I get down to this point, everything's been validated. All right, so I'm just going to call calculate total points. Now it's going to give me an error, of course, because that hasn't been written yet. So I'll comment that out for right now. But what I want to do now is I want to come in here and show you we're going to write one validation method in here. All right. Now, to do that, okay, we're going to be calling other methods, but the point is we're calling the same basic validation method with each of our things. Now, this would be different if, for example, on the payroll program, because we're not checking for the same thing. In all of these, we're checking to make sure it's numeric. We're checking to make sure that there's something there and that the something is in between these two values. So by doing this, control the first time is going to be the first text box. Control the second time will be the second text box. And control the third time will be the third text box. It's just, hopefully what we're moving toward in here is kind of, at least, a more simplistic way of doing this stuff. All right. Now, again, you may not agree with that, and that's totally okay. All right. That's why I said I'm showing you a way to do this. Notice I said a way. I'm not saying I'm showing you the way to do this. No. I'm showing you a way that hopefully when we get done will work. All right. Now there's three things that we want to check for each one of these text boxes. We want to check, is the text box empty? We want to check, is the text box numeric? And we want to check, is the text box within range? And we want to do that for each one of the three text boxes. All right. So this is how I'm going to do that. Now you may notice that what we were asked to do in here was to implement exception handling. There's no exceptions in here yet. There will be shortly. All right. So I'm going to come down here and do this now. All right. This validate text box. I'm going to remove that, remove true. As soon as I do, I'm going to get errors because it's expecting you to return a Boolean and I'm not doing anything right now. So up here, I called it keep going. So down here, I'm going to create another Boolean variable, but I'm going to call it is valid. All right, and I'm going to say is valid is equal to is text box empty. And I'm going to pass the control in, meaning that I'm going to be passing in either text box 1, the one with the first text test in it, or text box 2, the one with the second test in it, or text box 3, the one with the third test in it. And I'm going to write that right here. So private bool is text box empty. Notice that it's already picking it up in the IntelliSense. All right. So what do we want to do in here? What do we want to do? All right. Well, we're supposed to use exception handling, which means we're going to want to put a try catch in here. All right. I like to just throw all that stuff in right away. Now, it's not working yet, of course. There's no code in here. So what are we checking? Well, it's called is text box empty. So if control dot text, which means that'll be either txt1.text, txt2.text, or txt3.text. If that particular one is equal to nothing, well, what do we know? It is empty. So we will throw a new argument, null exception, just like that, nothing inside of there. Sometimes I don't like the IntelliSense. All right, which since we're throwing that in there, we're going to have to catch it. All right, so we'll work on that in just a minute. Now, if this isn't true, if this is not true, what does that mean? That means there was something in there. All right, so I want to return true. And now that I think about it, this was a crummy name. I should have changed it to is text box not empty? Okay, so I'll make that here too, not. And if you say, why did you do that? Because if I'm returning true, it's true that the text box was not empty. All right, but here, all right, this will be our show message or show error message, I'm sorry, that I copied in earlier. And well, what is this? This is an argument null exception, ANE, argument null exception. And what am I going to put in here? Well, I'm going to put ANE.message and then have a couple of blank lines. Then I'm going to put in ANE.getType. This is right out of your book. .toString, and then a couple of blank lines. And finally, a stack trace. And I want to just say that an exception was raised. And guess what? Earlier, I made a thing called ER, which stands for exception raised. All right. So again, the other thing I want to do here is, hey, I want to return false. It's false. It's false to say that it was not empty. It was empty. So now this is going to handle for all three of our text boxes because we're going to call it 3 times. We will call it first with text box 1, then we'll call it again with text box 2. Finally, we'll call it a third time with text box 3. So now with one routine here, we've handled is text box empty. All right. Hopefully that makes at least a little bit of sense. Now, well, notice I still got an error here. Why? Because I'm never returning anything. Okay. So what do I want to return? Well, if not is valid, what does that mean? That means that is valid is equal to false. Remember, that's a shortcut for saying if is valid equal false. Well, if it returned false, okay, there's nothing more to do in here. So I'm just going to return, but I can't return. I've got to return a Boolean. Well, I'm going to return that same false. All right. Okay, now it's still giving me an error, and it's giving me an error. It'll probably say not all paths can, yeah, not all paths return a value. If I came down here, I'm not going to keep this, but if I said return true, all my errors would be gone. But I'm not done yet. I have now validated that either there is something in the text box or there's not something in the text box. If is valid return true, there was something in the text box. If is valid return false, there was nothing in the text box. So what does that mean? Now I'm going to come in and say, is valid equal is text box numeric. Again, I'll get an error because we haven't written this yet, but we will in a second. And we pass in the control, just like we just did. All right. So we've got the is text box empty. So now we'll have another one, private bool, and it'll be an is text box numeric. And again, we'll pass in our control. Okay, so we're going to be able to call this 3 times, once for each one of these. I'm going to have a bool here that I'm going to call result. You've seen this test multiple times before. All right, and I'm going to have my try-catch block. All right, and now let's write this one. Okay. Now, again, I probably should change this from is text box numeric to is text box not numeric because of the way I wrote this. So we'll make that not as well. All right. Just like we have done before, I'm going to say result equal int dot try parse. So we're trying to parse that value. What value? Control dot text. And guess what? We don't even need the value. So I'm just going to put the out in one of those discard values like that. All right. But you got to realize that if this returns true, we had a number in there. And if it doesn't, we didn't have a number in there. All right. So we want to check that right away, of course. And if, all right, not result. Okay. Now what we want to throw is a new format exception. All right. But if that if isn't true, if this isn't true, that means we had a number in there. So we want to return true. All right. Finally, in our catch, this is what we're catching now is a format exception. FE, and all I have to do is copy what I wrote in here before. So I'm just going to copy that, and I have to change those ANEs to FEs right here for format exception. All right, so again, if this doesn't make a boatload of sense to you, try to go back in and play computer. All right, so what I'm saying here is, was the text box not numeric? All right. In fact, let's see, can we leave it at that? That's false. All right, I think we can leave that as is text box numeric. Let's see, let's look. Okay, is text box numeric? If it wasn't, return false. All right, no, I guess we do need the word not in there. My namings isn't great. You could rename this something else if you want. You know, does text box hold a numeric value? You could put true or false. So there's a lot of ways that this can be handled. All right. Now, just like we did before, we're going to come back up here then. Okay. And again, this has true or this has false in it, just like we looked at before. All right. So again, just like we showed here, if it returned false, okay, if it's not valid, we want to return false. Anytime we're returning false, we don't want to go on. It doesn't make sense to go on. All right. So we've gone in and we have checked what? We have checked whether or not there's a value in there. All right, not empty. We have made sure that it's numeric. So the only other thing we have to check is a range check. So I'm again going to call a routine that we have not written yet. All right. So is valid is equal to is text box within range. All right. And again, I want to pass the control. And it looks like I spelled that wrong there. And we'll write that one right now. And we have done this one before. All right. This is, we have written all these before. I'm just trying to make my life a little bit easier. That's all. All right. So once we've gotten to this point, we know two things. We know there was something inside of that text box. We also know that what was inside of that text box was a number. We know, we can be 100% certain of those. All right. But what we don't know is if that number is between 0 and 100. But we can say int score equal, and we can just convert it. Convert dot to int 32 control dot text. And that will take whatever whatever text box value it is and convert it to a number. So now we again put in our try catch. All right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say if that score, all right, was less than the minimum score, or that score is greater than the maximum score. So we're doing a range check right here. All right. So if this is the case, it's out of range. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to throw a new argument out of range exception. All right, which means if we're going to throw that, we have to catch that. All right, but if we get down to here, if we do get down to here, it wasn't out of range. We put in a valid number, so we can return true. Otherwise, if we get into here, it was out of range. So argument out of range exception. I'm again just going to cheat and copy this code in and change each one of these from FE because it's not a format exception. It's an argument out of range exception. All right, whoops, that's wrong though. And that should be ER. Okay, and we're returning false. Okay, so now when you look at this, we have made this check. If the text box being empty or not empty, if we return false, okay, we get the heck out. Then we make this check. This is for numeric. If it failed, we can return false. Then we're up to here. All right. So we're checking now. What we are checking in there is the range. Okay. And then again, like I said, I'm hoping at least that makes some sense. Now, when we do this, once again, if it was not valid, we're returning false. But now if we get down to here, we return true. This means that all of our checks have passed. All right, that means all of our checks have passed. What we're going to do when I get done with this, we don't have much to go on here, but rather than going on to the other one, we're going to step through this. So just so you hopefully see exactly what's happening in here. All right. Okay. So going back up here now, we checked to validate that it wasn't. We validated text box 1. We validated text box 2. We validated 1, 2, and 3. If we get down to here, they all were valid. So now we can calculate the total number of points, which is pretty easy. I'm just going to add up the 3 test scores. Again, this is just how I did it. By no means am I claiming, yeah, this is the way I did it. It's the way you should do it. I'm giving you a way of doing things. So I'm going to go down to the bottom here right before my clear routine. And this will be a private void, and it'll be calculate total points. All right. And pretty easy. Int. Now I can say test grade 1, and I can call these whatever I want, but I called it test grade 1, and that equals a convert dot to int 32 txt test 1 dot text dot trim. All right. And there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3, which means I better change these to 2 and 3 as well. All right. So now I've got all 3 of my test scores. All right. And I'm not actually calculating the total points here. I could, but I'm not. Okay. So I could do that right here if we wanted to. But instead, again, this is just how I wrote it. I calculate average and grade. And it's going to need test grade 1, test grade 2, and test grade 3. All right. Well, I better write that. And I can call them whatever I want, but that's too much typing. So I'm going to say int G1 for grade 1, int G2 for grade 2, and int G3 for grade 3. All right. Now I can just say, I can do the average right away. Decimal average. Now remember, if I do this, I'm going to show you 2 things that would be wrong. I don't want to say G1 plus G2 plus G3 divided by 3. I don't want to do that because that's going to do this first and then add these 2 to it. So that would be wrong. All right. So I'm going to do it like this. Now remember, if I divided this by 3 like that, it would throw away any decimal portion, which I don't want to have happen. I need the equal sign here. That's why it's giving me an error. All right, so I'm going to put 0.0m. Okay, now even though it's an int and it's divided by a decimal, what'll happen is, remember, this is on the left-hand side of an equal sign. So it will promote that result, that sum, to a decimal and then divide it by another decimal. All right. Now I could have come in here and written another routine, but I just did all of it in here. So I said string letter grade equals nothing, and then put a big if statement in here. So if average is greater than or equal to 90M, then I know the letter grade is equal to an A. And because I'm being lazy here, let's just do this. A, B, C, D, F. All right. So else, if the average is greater than or equal to 80, the letter grade is a B. Else, if the average is greater than or equal to a 70, the letter grade is a C. Else, if the average is greater than or equal to a 60, all right, the letter grade is a D. Finally, I'll put one more else in there that says if the average is greater than or equal to 0, the letter grade is an F. All right. Now, the only other thing I have to do, everything is done, except I've got to put the answer right there. Everything else has been done. All right. So let's put it there. So txt, I called it average grade dot text equal, and I used some string interpolation here. Again, I put it in parens, even though the parens are not mandatory there. And I'm going to say average, and I'll put it to 2 decimal places, equal, and then the letter grade. Now, what I want to do is I want to go over the entire program, but before we do, I want to run it, make sure it works. All right. So let's do that right now. Now there's nothing in there. All right. And I should get this same message right here. I should get the same message, except in my stack trace, it'll be a different line number for if I leave this empty, or I leave this empty, or I leave this empty. All right, so let's put a value in there and do it again. It is giving me it on 94. Okay, so it's giving me the same error. And again, the same error. So you'll see that if I come through here, now it is saying it's got everything in there. All right, if I put junk in here, I'm now getting a format exception where the first time when I left it blank, all right, I got an argument null exception. It's doing what I'm telling it to do, in other words. So again, if I put garbage in here, you just saw that. If I put garbage in here, I again get another format exception. And again, another format exception. There it worked. And if I come in here and put something out of range, all right, an argument out of range exception. All right. So again, we'll get it in all three of these. Another argument out of range exception. Another argument out of range exception. Okay. It appears at least as though everything that's in here is working. So let's go through the entire program, spend a few minutes going through it. All right. And hopefully that'll help your understanding of what's going on here before we go on to the next one. Again, 3 student grades we're inputting, must be between 0 and 100 rather. We calculate the average by adding the 3 grades together and dividing that by 3. And then based on the grading system that you see right in front of you. All right. Now, one thing that's kind of screwy about this is correct, yet this isn't the way that I wrote it. All right. In other words, really, this should be 80 and then less than 90 equal a B. 70 and less than 80 is a C, because that really is what it is. What you don't want to do, all right, what you don't want to do is you don't want to have like an 89.5 average where it doesn't give you any grade. All right. And this would be less than 60. All right. So we came in and we implemented methods for the input validation, and we used exception handling. We wanted, again, to ensure that only valid grades, numeric, if it's numeric, it has to exist. So exist, numeric, and between 0 and 100 are accepted. So we came in here, created our 3 constants. The last one was not mandatory. I just didn't have to type in exception raised for those 3. I just typed in ER, or I just used the abbreviation. All right. Nothing new, so I'm not going to go through anymore the clear button. I'm not going to go through anymore the exit button. I'm hoping by now those make enough sense to people. What we did change then in here, in this example, what we did change is we are passing the actual text box itself to our different methods. So we've got one method called validate text box. So we are writing a method that is calling a method, and this method, the validate text box, is going to call 3 different methods. Validate whether or not it's numeric, validate whether or not it exists, validate whether or not it's numeric, and validate whether or not it's within range. All right, so basically what we're doing here again is we are trying to think of the word, and I can't right now. Replacing is the word I want. We are replacing those generic error methods that we will use on the next example and that were shown in chapter 7. All right, we are replacing them with exception handlers. And there are different ways that this could have been written. All right. So again, with each one of these, we're passing in the actual control itself. That's passing in the entire text box. So is that. So is that. That's why we can say control.text. And if we're working with this text box, it's the same thing as though we said txt test1.text. All right. Okay. So we come in here then and we call the validate on each one. We'll go over that in a minute. If all of them succeed, then we're ready to calculate our points, which is going to call another method, which is going to calculate our average, and it's going to calculate our letter grade. All right. So again, for each one of these that's in here, you can see that I'm passing in the control. So again, that right there is the actual text box itself. And we're passing that out to is text box not empty, and is text box not numeric, and is text box within range. All right, and actually, when I think about this, okay, is text box, let's see. If it's false, if it's true, then the text box would not be empty, so we'd go on. All right. I mean, you could play with these words. I probably didn't use the best words in here, but the idea is, does the logic make sense? All right. I will tell you very quickly, because I don't want to waste your time with my stories, but I'll make it short and sweet, that when I was a professional programmer, a lot of the times when we were writing error code like this, it just seemed to be that it was really late at night. And we'd write stupid stuff. Not like I'm showing you where you're writing error messages that make sense, etc. I've got a friend who right now, believe it or not, runs a telecommunications company in Wisconsin. The guy is brilliant, but if any of his code that he wrote at the time were ever to have fired, he probably would have been fired because he wrote, F this and F that. All right. You shouldn't do stuff like that. You should always be a professional. All right. So if this didn't work, you're going to return. If this did work, you're going to call this one. After you call this one, if it didn't work, you're going to return. If it did work, you're going to call this one. After you call this one, if it didn't work, you're going to return false. But if it did work, you're going to return true because all three of your things in here passed. All right. So when we look in here, these are very similar to what we have been writing. All right. We're checking in a try catch if the control text, whatever that was, again, if what the text box's text was empty, we throw an argument null exception. All right. When we caught it, we're showing an error. Now, one thing we could have done in here, which would have made more sense, but I didn't. So let's put that in and see if it works. Control.text equals nothing. Control.focus. I want to just see if this one will work. Right there, those two lines. So now, if I leave this empty and I click, it's gone back there. All right, it's empty, so you can't tell. Well, let's take this code and let's put it in here. And let's also put it in here. Now, when we run this, if we put in garbage, okay, it's doing that, but notice it's clearing it and it's putting the focus there. That's a little bit nicer. Okay, same thing. All right, those are things I should have thought of. Now, what we could do if we wanted to would be to write another routine, because we're calling that once, twice, 3 times. We don't have to write another routine. It worked just fine. But we could have done it if we wanted to. All right. So if this is empty, we're throwing an argument null exception that's going to print out all the information, and it's going to set the focus and return false. Why? Because our check failed. If we don't go through this, our check succeeded, so we're returning true. Then we do a similar thing in here for the numeric or not numeric. All right. We attempt to parse it. We're not doing anything with the output. So I used one of those discard values. One thing, hopefully you notice in here, you may have noticed it, you may not have, but if you look at the top, we have what? We have 3 constants. We have no global variables. One thing you're going to be told on your test on Wednesday, your next hands-on test, no global variables. Global constants are acceptable. Global variables are not. And they are not because of what we talked about a while ago, is that they can lead to undesired side effects. All right. Okay. So again, we're coming in here now and we're validating. So we're saying attempt to parse this into a number. If you can't, now throw a format exception, which will print out all that stuff. Now we do have junk in there, so we're clearing it out, we're setting the focus, and we're returning false. If this failed, all right, then it was numeric, so returning true. Finally, when we go in and do the last one, now we know that it was a number in there. We know it was numeric. All right. So we are converting it. Not only do we know it's numeric, we know it's an integer, so it's a whole number. So now we know we can just convert it, and now we have a valid score as far as a numeric score, but we have to check. So this is a range check. We are checking to see whether or not the score that we entered is less than 0 or it's greater than 100. If either of those conditions are true, then our argument is out of range. So we are throwing a new argument out of range exception. All right, which we catch down here. We again show the error message. We clear the field. We set the focus back and we return false. If this was not out of range, we return true. So again, if this returned true, and this returned true, and this all returned true, that means all 3 of our checks passed. So we're going to return true to the calling routine up there. All right, which means we can now go down and do this. This is calculate total points. And you'll notice here I'm setting my test grades. There is a little bit of code duplication in here. All right, what do I mean? Well, here we're setting these, and here we're also setting them. Technically, so are we here. But we're using local variables, not global variables. We're trying to write this with a good code structure, which says you are to limit your use of global variables. I'm limiting ours to none. That's ideally what you want to have, is no global variables. So this is basically setting up our 3 grades. Then we're calling calculate average and test grade. Now, just so you know, a natural question would have been, okay, I understand everything you're doing here. Couldn't you have just taken this and put it in here? The answer is yes. I could have done everything in there. It would have been fine. Not only that, the other thing we could have done is in here, where we're doing all this big if statement, we could have written another routine to do that. What I don't want to see people do anymore are writing humongous routines that are doing a lot of work inside of our button click event. Our button click event should act like a driver. It should be doing as little processing as possible. We are doing some stuff in ours. If you look in here, this is our calculate. But all it's doing is it's calling one routine or not calling a routine. It's not doing any actual executable code in there. All right, we don't have any logic in there other than, hey, if this is true, do this, otherwise get out. All right. So this is what I attempted to show you in here. It was a program that input 3 student grades. We validated 3 things. First, each grade exists. Second, each grade was numeric. Third, each grade was within range. If all of those passed for each of the values in here, all right, if each of those passed, then we calculated the average by adding the 3 together and dividing by 3.0, which gave us a number, which we used with that grading scale right there. All right. In fact, again, we could say something like this, just like I showed you before. 90 and less than or equal to 100 is an A. 80 to less than 90 is a B. 70 to less than, 80 is a C. 60 to less than 70 is a D. And 0 to less than 60 is an F, because that's actually what we're testing. All right. So hopefully at least that made at least some sense to you. Now, again, I want to say this one last time before we go on, and that is whether you choose to use this control thing that I've just shown you, or you don't use it, is 110% up to you. If you found what I just did to be confusing, and you come up with a different way of doing it, more power to you. All right, there were a couple people who took the test that very much impressed me. And what I mean by that is they went out and looked either online or through some other mechanism. And you can literally set these up, all 3, so that if you attempt to enter a non-numeric character, it doesn't accept it. All right, and they put that stuff in theirs. You didn't have to do that. We haven't talked about that yet. All right, so let's look at the last one. We'll set up the, I'm going to quickly set up the interface for it, the graphical user interface, and then we will take another break. So create a program that inputs an employee's hours worked, must be between 0 and 84. And I made them decimal, so I could have said 0.00, but I didn't. And an hourly rate between 0 and I put 99.99. From there, calculate the gross pay. If the hours worked are greater than 40, you get overtime, and it'll be double time, which will be another constant. All right. Then we're going to use in here the 3 of the validation methods that are in chapter 7, the is present validation method, the is decimal validation method, and the is within range validation method. All right, we're going to use those on both of the fields here. All right, and we're going to use the is valid data method as shown in the text as well. This is actually wrong now because I used time and a half. I didn't use double time. So the answer here would work if you used 1.5x, but with 2x, it's wrong. I apologize for that. All right, so I'm going to quickly throw this together. All right, and then we're going to take a break. So if you want to take a break now, go ahead. I'm imagining this is going to be done sometime around 10:10, and we'll take a break and we'll pick it up again at 10:25. It'll give me plenty of time to build the interface. All right, it's 10:20, so I'm going to continue on. What I did during the break then is I built the interface. I verified that indeed I had renamed everything. I set my accept button, my cancel button. I set the start position to center screen, and I set my tab order to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, I also went in and wrote my clear form routine because it was pretty simple. Clear, 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 set the focus. So that's right here. And I copied in, as I have been, the exit program or not and the show error message. Okay. Finally, I went back in and I added the comment that I had created. All right. So then taking it from the top, you can see here, I have about a half dozen constants, one of which I had to change because I had this set to 1.5. All right. So the minimum hours somebody can work is 0. The maximum is 84. The minimum hourly rate or H rate is 0. The maximum is 99.99. The maximum numbers you can work with, or the maximum number of hours you can work without getting any overtime is 40. And again, the overtime rate is 2. All right. So what we are told to do on this example, okay, I've got my constants for both these. We want to calculate the gross pay, but if the employee worked greater than 40 hours, give them overtime. This time we want to use the validation methods in the book. So I copied in is present, is decimal, and is within range. So down here, there's is present right out of the book, is decimal right out of the book, and is within range right out of the book. All right. And now I'm going to write the is valid data method in here. Okay. And that's really almost all that we have to do. There's not a whole heck of a lot to do in this program. So this example should go at least fairly quickly. And then we'll talk again, I want to go over what I'd like you to try to do, or in what I will do tomorrow in the pretest. I will save that. I will write one of the examples using the validation methods and the other one using exception handling. Okay. All right. So let's go back to this. So taking it from the top then in calculate. Okay. Trying to keep it simple and again, kind of basing it off of what was in the book. All right. I did set up my variables here. So decimal hours worked equals 0.00 M. Decimal hourly rate is equal to 0.00 M, and decimal gross pay is equal to 0.00 M. All right, those are the things I'm either reading in, being hours worked and hourly rate, or that I'm calculating, being gross pay, not gross page. Okay, so all that stuff is done. Now, I'm going to get an error here, so let's just put in right here, private bool is valid data. All right, and all I'm going to do in here is just return true. I'll change it. We're going to write a lot of code in there in just a minute. but just so we have something in there. So now I can say if is valid data, and it won't give me an error message. Now you may or may not know this, but putting in something like this is typically referred to as a stub. In other words, I'm just putting something in there so that when I call it in here, I don't get error messages, but it's with the idea that by no means is that routine done. All right, so if it is valid data, then I can take my hours worked and actually set it. Convert to decimal. Okay, well, txt hours worked dot text, and I can put a dot trim in there. Never hurts to do that. And then I can do the same thing for hourly rate. Again, equal to convert to decimal, covert. Txt hourly rate dot text dot trim. All right, so those two are both done. Then finally, I can say gross pay is equal to calculate gross pay, which hasn't been written yet. And that will need hours worked. And it'll need hourly rate. Again, I'm getting an error right now because that hasn't been written. So I can put in another stub here. And oops, I can just say private void calculate gross pay. Remember, I have to pass these two in, but I don't have to call them this. So I'm going to call it decimal HW for hours worked and decimal HR for hourly rate. In addition, it's giving me an error because I have to return a decimal, and I'm not returning anything right now. So that has to become decimal, and I can put a stub in there that just says return 0.0 M. Okay, and since I spelled calculate wrong here, it doesn't like that either. And now I have no errors. All right, again, I've got some code to write here, but I don't have any errors. All right, if I ran the program now, it wouldn't do much of anything, but it wouldn't break, and I guess that's kind of important. The other thing I can do too, okay, notice this is grayed out. And if I put my mouse here, it says unnecessary assignment to a value of gross pay. But what I want to do is if everything here works, I want to say txt gross pay dot text equals, and let's use some string interpolation. And it'll just be gross pay, which will format as currency. Whoops, it has to be in our curly braces here. And you'll notice that once I did that, now this is no longer grayed out. All right. So what I have to write now is valid data. And then when we get done with that, we have to write the calculate gross pay. Neither one of them are really that big because when you look at this, these are the only two fields I have to validate. And when I do the gross pay, it's going to be this times this if it's 40 or less hours. And if it's more than 40 hours, we're going to have to allot or allocate for overtime pay, which again, we'll do as double time. All right, so let's write this. So I'm going to change our is valid data. Okay, now again, it's as always, it's up to you, but if you go back and if you look in your textbook, all right, you can see if you need, something that'll help you or whatever. I'm going to go back here. I think it was 224 or something like that. Yeah, so this is where we are. You could always copy that. You say, well, I don't have a copy. Well, then, yeah, you would have to type it in. I do have a little advantage here because I have both the hard copy of the book and an electronic copy of the book. All right. So, I mean, I can come down here and this is what we want for the is valid data. Okay, we've got two of these to try to make my life a little easier. I am going to copy it in. Maybe that'll make it easier. Maybe it won't. We'll see. So I'm going to copy that in right now. So that'll be what's in here. So I'm going to get rid of that and replace it with this. I'll get all sorts of errors. All right, and it does some formatting that I don't like, etc. All right, so I've got our Boolean success. Now, what do we want to validate? No, we want to validate the hours worked text box. And we also want to validate the hourly rate text box. All right, so move all those down. There we go. All right, so what do we want to call here? Well, first of all, this is going to have to be txt, there we go, hours worked dot text. And the name of the field is hours worked. All right, so we've got that one done now. Okay, that's the is decimal. We can do right away. Let's copy these. All right, we don't want to use in here 1 and 100. All right, no, we want to use min hours and max hours. All right, the other thing we didn't do is we want to check for the presence or absence. So again, I'm going to grab this and just add here is present. All right, so that's the first one. And to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to now copy that and put that in here. And now this will be txt hourly rate. All right, here and here and here. Here, that's just a heading, so let's make that look a little nicer. And this will be hourly rate. So let's copy that. All right, and what we want in here then will be min H rate and max H rate. Now, you're to the point where hopefully at least this will make sense, but let's go over it again anyway. All right, we're assuming everything's going to work. In other words, we're assuming our data is valid. All right. If we find out that it's not valid, that means that either is present, return false. All right. Meaning that there was a message there, or I shouldn't say return false. There was a message. It wasn't empty, or is decimal wasn't empty, or is within range wasn't empty. We're assuming one of them was not empty for this or for this. All right. This will be that error message. We're setting it equal to nothing or the empty string. It will be reset. Notice that's what we're taking the result of is present or is decimal or is within range. That's either going to return an empty string, if indeed it was present, and if indeed it was decimal, and if indeed it was within range, or one of those error messages that you just saw. All right, so this now, what we've done in here is we have validated both fields. But when we tried to validate them, if we did have an error message, now we want to say success is false, and I'm going to do my show error message. And it'll show the error message with entry error in there. And again, if I wanted to, this is the only place it's showing, but if I wanted to, I could have come in here, and I could have done in here, I could have made another constant. Something like that to let them know that there was some kind of an entry error. Now down here, notice it's not an error anymore. And if we had an error, success is false, and we return it, If we had no errors, success is true from up above, and we return it. All right. If everything succeeded, we're now going to do this. And again, what is this? Convert what's in the text in the first text box to a decimal, convert whatever is in the second text box to a decimal, and then call calculate gross pay, passing in those two values that you just made, those two decimal values. Finally, when you're all done, put it in the last text box. All right. So for our calculate gross pay right now, it's going to be 0. Doesn't matter what we put in. I mean, we could run it now. It should run just fine. And we can check our errors. So there's our 4 errors. Here it'll go down to 3 errors. Here it'll be go down and still be 3 errors. All right. And again, now it'll be 2 errors. Now it'll be 1 error. Now it'll be 1 error. All right. And if we put a 10 in here, it'll be 0. No matter what we put in these two, if they're valid at 0, because we didn't write this yet. Clear looks like it's working, and exit looks like it's working. So let's write this. All right. All right. So we're going to need a gross pay. All right, that we're going to return, and I just called mine GP for gross pay. And I do want you to understand something. There's 2 ways or many ways we could have done this. All right. In other words, notice I said gross pay is equal to this. Totally fine to do. But we could have also, remember, we just learned how to do this. We could have said calculate gross pay, and we could have passed gross pay in as either an out gross pay or, geez Louise, Jeff, or as a ref gross pay. Either one of those would have worked. Let's keep it a ref. It's giving us an error because we've got to go back in here now and change this. So we'll say ref. Whoops, decimal hourly rate, ref decimal GP for gross pay. Now we're still getting an error, but if I go back to my return 0M, there's no error there, and there's no error here. All right. You should be doing this stuff in whatever way makes the most sense to you, unless you're told otherwise. All right. So we're going to do our gross pay in here. If the hours worked was less than or equal to 40, which we called max non-OT. All right. If that's the case, okay, what do we know? Well, no overtime was worked. Okay, so gross pay is equal to, in fact, this is giving me an error because since we got rid of that, we're not returning anything anymore. So this should be void. Not valid. Good golly. All right, so gross pay is equal to hours worked times hourly rate. All right, that means there was no overtime. Else, there was overtime. So that means you worked some overtime. So some overtime was worked. All right, and again, as always, there are plenty of ways you can figure this out. But I'm going to say gross pay equals, this is how I did it. Max non-OT times hourly rate, that's your straight time. That's the 40 hours that you work for the week, plus the hours worked minus max non-OT, all right, times the hourly rate times the overtime rate. what did I call that? Or OT rate. All right. And I've given you examples of using that before. Either way, whether we did this or whether we did this, our gross pay should now be set. All right. So let's just check. Now, it's a little different calculation because it's double time for overtime worked. So if we say, for example, that a person worked 50 hours and they make $10 per hour. All right. That means if we look at the calculation we did right here, all right, their first 40 hours should be 40 times 10. That's this right here. All right, so that 40 times 10. And we have to add to that then, all right, the hours worked, which was 50 minus 40 times the hourly rate, which was 10, times the overtime rate, which is 2. Okay, so this right here is 400. 50 minus 40 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. 100 times 2 is 200. If I did my math right, that should be 400 plus 200, so it should be 600. Let's see if that's what we get in our calculation here. So, whoops, 50 and 10, $600. Looks at least like everything's working. I can hit escape, boom, I get that clear. I can put in and hit enter, and that works. All right. So look, that looks funky because it's 1,000, but they've got 5 hours of overtime. All right. That was where the extra money came from, so to speak. I would want to go back in there and run more test cases to make sure. I mean, I already showed you with nothing in these that it worked, but you'd want to come in, excuse me, and you'd want to run some more test cases to make sure everything's working the way that you think or want it to work. All right, so that's both of these. Close that. When I come in here tomorrow, someplace in here, I've got a folder that's called I think it's C# pretest 2, because I screwed the first one up. So this is where I'm going to put in your third pretest tomorrow. That third pretest, again, all right, what I've asked you to do is to take the previous pretest, all right, with the temperature conversion and the batting average problems, and redo it so that the temperature conversion problem now uses the same generic validation methods that we just looked at, and the batting average problem uses the exception handling that we looked at a little bit earlier. So starting tomorrow, right at 8:05, I'm going to go through those 2 problems. I am also going to make sure that tomorrow that I look at your test and make sure that there's nothing that I'm missing. I want to at least give you an idea of what's happening on that test. All right. Again, Wednesday will be the hands-on test. As always, you'll get a copy of it from me early. All right. And as always, I will go over the instructions for the test and show you a working version of it between 8:05 a.m. and 8:20 a.m. You will have the rest of the period to work on that. It will be due by midnight. Thursday, as it says, we will begin chapter 8, probably, if not the longest chapter in the book, it's amongst the longest chapters in the book. All right. Friday, again, will be a lab period. And hopefully, if you're all caught up by then, because you're going to get an hour of lab time today and at least an hour of lab time tomorrow, all right, then you will be able to be working on the chapters 6 and 7 homework that I just gave out today. That's due again next Sunday. All right, so we will work on chapter 8 then on Thursday, and we will continue on with that next week. We're going to do in there, just so you know, we're going to start there by using some console examples. Yes, we are going to go back to console. There's a reason for it. You'll see when we get to that point. All right, so we'll finish up this week with chapter 8. We'll go into chapter 8 next week. And towards the end of next week, then, if we can keep this up, we will be going over 9, 10, and 11. 11 is just on debugging. So there's really going to be nothing on a test about that. Okay? Because you've been debugging all semester anyway. And remember, again, I'll put it in your notes eventually, but 2 weeks from today, so Monday the 19th, there will be no class. Rankin is closed due to the President's Day holiday. All right. I don't know if I'm going to be around then or not. All right. But I will let you know. All right. So the other thing I just was going to mention to you, and then I'm done, is what I'll do, just in case you can't find it or don't have it anymore, I will send out that pretest, the last one that I gave, and I'll just write up on the top, redo the temperature one with generic error methods, redo the batting average problem with exception handling, but I'll send that out to everyone along with the email that I send out at the end of the period. So again, you're done. You've got over an hour to work on this today, all right, or to catch up. Please, if you're behind, try to catch up. Because what I'm supposed to do this afternoon is look and see who's not caught up. And again, fill out those, whatever the heck those things, early alert messages. And I don't like doing that any more than you like receiving them. Okay. So I will see you tomorrow at 8:05 to go over pretest number 3. Have a good day. I'll talk to you then. Thanks.